This conference will now be recorded.
Well, Dave, really excited to have you on the podcast. I've been excited for this one for a little while. So, for those that don't know who you are from your social media career, what's your background and journey to what you currently do?
Well, I guess we'll start out by telling everybody what and first, thank you for having me on. It's always awesome to talk to you. So,
For sure.
I like to be on the other side now that I have my own podcast, so I know how tough it is. So thanks for having me. So I'll start by explaining who I am. So, obviously I'm Dave Wakeman. The brand name is The Revenue Architect, and I am a consultant that focuses on high impact strategies. So I work with organizations all over the world, sports, entertainment, uh, professional services, nonprofits, on how they can maximize the impact of their strategy to reach more donors, more customers, maximize their revenue, create just more impact in the work that they're already doing. The journey, how I got here was kind of long and winding, and it makes it completely, it either would maybe completely unemployable, or it makes it complete sense for what I do now. So I started out fresh out of college helping open nightclubs all over the country. Probably one of the last great national nightclub chains called Boogie Nights, who we opened locations in Fort Lauderdale, Houston, St. Louis, and Chicago. We have multiple, probably at the max 8 locations all over the country. I learned about everything I know about marketing being in nightclubs. From there, I ended up going to work in Seattle for the Experience Music Project, which is a museum dedicated to the spirit and creativity of America as expressed through rock and roll music. Was started by Paul Allen and his sister Jody Allen Patton, and that was like pretty cool because over time I evolved into this person who really could tap into people's desire and emotion around music and creativity, and it led to me being able to raise lots and lots of money. I moved to New York City, and the thing that people in the tickets and sports and entertainment know me most for is I worked with American Express and the Centurion card on the program that helped create a global distribution chain for Centurion card members to buy tickets anywhere in the world. And I used the primary and secondary market to create a global distribution chain so that Black Card members could just call up and get a ticket to anything they wanted to see. And it was like really one of the super, super cool projects, because over time I ended up with like some bold face names as clients. Guys like Joe Torre, Kanye, and Dan Marino were like just like 3 of them. And from there, I worked with Yellowtail, the wine company, through the same partnership to help bring Yellowtail to the mass market in America. With their advertising agency, we created a experiential marketing campaign that went to 36 cities and introduced, or 36 games, not cities, that introduced Yellowtail to an entirely different audience, which was tailgaters at football games. And that helped drive about a 635% increase in Yellowtail sales from one year to the next. And what really pushed it over the edge was that it got the attention of Costco, and that really drove Yellowtail to the point we know today. From there, I started a business called Two Kings Tickets and sold that, and then I became what I am today.
Very cool. And so I think one of the common misconceptions when you work with a professional sports team is marketing sits over there and sells individual game tickets, and ticket sales sits over here and they sell groups and seasons and partial plans and premium seating and all that. Can you talk about, when sales and marketing is done right, how marketing supports salespeople?
Yeah.
Not just the sales organization, but how, when marketing is done right, can it support sales people?
Yeah, and so that's an interesting thing, because one of the ideas that I offer up pretty regularly these days is that everybody is in the marketing business. We all have a role as marketers. All of our jobs, if we're in any kind of organization, is to generate demand. So for me, when marketing and sales is working together, marketing is leading the way and is helping identify and connect prospects to the sales team. The way we see it in a lot of sports teams today is that the marketing team maybe does a lot of affinity type marketing, or a lot of how would I want to call it, promotion based marketing. And maybe everything doesn't seem to have a consistent theme that drives people back to the sales process. And then the sales teams are often tasked with the idea of having to generate demand for their product or their service, right? So for me, one of the big things that I like to see if a sales and marketing team is working effectively together is that there's some sort of a feedback loop, right? Where if you take a marketing action, it feeds back into the sales process. About 18 months ago, maybe 12 to 18 months ago, I wrote an article for Seat Magazine, which is for the Association of Luxury Suite Directors, if no one knows, about the modern sales and marketing process. And it talked specifically about a program that the Miami Marlins did when the first or second year they moved into their new stadium downtown Miami, and how they would use a marketing kickoff event. So it might be a letter campaign, it might be some sort of special experiential campaign, or it might be a contact marketing thing where they sent a piece of paraphernalia, a memento, some kind of souvenir to a certain predefined set of targets. And then through that marketing activity, their sales team would follow up on that activity to help drive people to an event, a closing event. And then they would have an opportunity to, depending on the target of their focus, maybe have an event where they had 20, 30, 40, 50 people there, where they could get them to make a decision, either buy or don't buy. And to me, that's a really good example of marketing and sales kind of feeding each other. It's not like marketing's just over here taking actions and waiting for something to happen. They're taking a specific set of actions that are predetermined to drive a certain action on the behalf of for the sales team. And then there's a feedback loop that closes itself, and if they're successful, they close some business. If they don't, they can go, well, why didn't this work? And how can we make it and improve it better? Which with a lot of this sort of mass media marketing and advertising that goes on, the feedback loop and the metrics on these things aren't necessarily as clear. That said, there's plenty of room for that kind of affinity and mass market stuff. It's just that, like, when you're trying to tie it into sales, your marketing needs to support the sales team in a much different way. But there's definitely room for both.
Yeah, and then one of the things that you may want to speak to real quick is, I think one thing that sales reps should do, and you can agree or disagree, is they should also take a look at how their organization is branding themselves and what type of message that they're taking ownership of. And the rep should make sure that that's incorporated to the way they sell, right? So that their sales process is a reflection of the brand and vice versa, because when sales and marketing are aligned, from everything from what a person sees in public to what a rep's saying on the phone, that creates a very seamless process, as opposed to cold call, sales demonstration, potential to buy. If the process seems more seamless, it's more likely to get a positive response for the rep himself.
Well, I wouldn't disagree with any of that. That would be, that would be something I would completely stand behind. I am fond of saying that your marketing is every touch point that your fan or potential customer has with you. And so if you don't think about what the entire life cycle and life journey of a customer or a fan is, it's a missed opportunity. Because the thing is if everybody's operating from a different playbook, then the likelihood of a consistent message becomes much less likely. It becomes much more likely that you are going to encounter a situation where there are different messages. There is some sort of lack of cohesion in the message, and that's unfortunate, because it does create a sort of dissonance in the fan base and in your customer base that's going to lead them to likely make a decision that's going to be not to buy. It's it's like giving people too many choices, right? When I'm writing a proposal for a consulting project, I like to give people 2 or 3 options, right? Because if I give them too many, then the likelihood is they become overwhelmed, and then the choice is no. I mean, that's just basic consumer psychology. And the same thing applies when you're giving multiple different messages, and different touch points for people. I mean, a great example for me is the way that people are treated when they're at a ballpark or at a venue. When I worked with the Seahawks and the Supersonics for a short period of time, we talked about customer service being really a key to success of the organization, and and over time that's become something that's even more ingrained in the way I feel, because I know that me personally, can be easily turned off by an usher or a ticket taker, or somebody working in the food and beverage department being rude to me, and I'll just go somewhere else, because the thing is there's so many demands on our entertainment dollars, or our client development budgets, that we don't have to go somewhere where we don't feel appreciated.
Yep. No, that's absolutely right, and I think it's an important thing for, it's easy for sales to blame marketing, but a lot of times, sales has got to, burden that. All right, what is the marketing message trying to be able to say, and how can we make sure our sales team sounds like it's an extension of the brand that we're trying to create? And so I think that dissonance that you talked about, you and I have talked about this offline quite a bit, is a lot of times what creates a lot of the troubles that sales teams ultimately have, and why they ultimately, get forced into that. We'll make 100 calls a day, and you're going to find someone who's going to buy challenges.
And my question is that really true? Because the thing is like, sure, if you live in New York or Los Angeles, you probably feel like you have a never-ending list of people you can call on. But if you live in, let's say like Minneapolis, right, or St. Louis, or any of these places, is that true? Because how many times can you call and either not leave a message, or leave a message like going, hey, I'm just calling from the Cardinals and I want to talk to you about buying tickets, right? Before people tune you out, and they just, they put the little note on their phone to like block you, or they, make it do not answer, right? I mean, how often does that happen? So you gotta have multiple ways to engage and connect with, market to, and sell to your audience. I mean, that's the reality, because I'm only going to speak for myself here. I don't answer phone numbers I don't know most of the time, right? I mean, and so to try to pretend like that isn't, if you don't do it, that somebody else doesn't do it, I think it's just being a little dishonest with yourself, just because you're trying to squeeze a tactic into a strategy just because it's more comfortable for you.
Yes. And so you've had a really interesting view into sales across, to your experience, multiple different ways to entertain people. And so when you think of some of the best salespeople you've come across, what are some of those qualities that they all seem to have? So we're being really general here.
So the best qualities in a salesperson that I see, number one, they care. I mean, I shouldn't go, that should not be as a surprise, but I am very much bullish on the idea of empathy in business. I don't feel like there's always, either empathy's not rewarded enough, or it's not considered often enough. But the best people care about the person they're selling to. That's like, if I stop there, and that you hired your sales folk for empathy, you would be you probably see a big improvement of your sales team, just that alone. A second thing, though, that after empathy is the persistent, right? There is an idea I have been working on, which is called the action imperative, and it'll probably come out in like a webinar soon. But it's about, they just continue to churn out activity, right? They continue to focus on moving things towards the next logical step, which in sales is really like a good thing to think about, right? It's like, if I'm making a cold call or I'm making a sales call, what's the next logical step I can take for my team? What's the sales process look like, and where am I at in the process? And so the best salespeople are really focused on activity, not pointless activity, but the kind of activity that's going to move them to the next logical step in the sales process, which is can often be missed because of the noise and all the different activities that can bog you down and can take hold. And then the final thing I would say after empathy and the action based is that they are always learning, right? I think another one of, besides empathy, maybe the second most important and critical skill that isn't given nearly enough attention today is business acumen, is the ability for somebody to have a conversation with a prospect or a customer that is relevant to their business, to what they do, that can take not just a small term, a myopic view of the business situation at hand, but can look at the bigger context, that kind of has an understanding of what the person on the other end of the line or on the other end of the conversation is feeling or looking at, and can kind of have some insights and ideas based on their own experience, their own knowledge, their own learning, that create value, that add value, that enable them to have some impact for their customer, for their prospect, that doesn't necessarily have to always fall into the idea of they're buying from you. So those would be the big three I would point out.
And I was about to say, I think anybody that's seen one of my sales trainings may wonder if you and I just practiced that. But no, that was Dave being completely genuine. And there's a couple things. I mean, I couldn't agree more with the learning side. And we can talk about that another time, another place. But on the empathy side, I want to make sure that it's one of those things that young reps understand. It's not just caring about the customer. More than that, it's caring about the results that the customer gets based on buying your product, right? Because I think sometimes we get into that dance of we want to care about the customer, we want to build rapport with the customer, and we forget to ever cover the actual business side. And I think people tend to teach rapport more than they teach really caring about the business, the tangible results that someone gets by buying that. And those are two very separate things, right?
Well, that's absolutely right. And we didn't practice this at all. In fact, I had no idea that you were going to ask the question that way, I don't think. But one of the things that I've talked about, and I'm pretty sure that if we Google me on LinkedIn or look at some of my older LinkedIn articles, one of the specific examples I use is that when I was doing the stuff with American Express, my best year in sales, I sold $10 million in tickets. And how did I do that? I didn't do it by selling a ticket. I did it by understanding what my customers needed or what their pain points were, why they were buying the tickets, what they were hoping to achieve by buying the tickets, and helping them meet those needs. And a lot of times what would be a customer, a buyer who maybe had a $100 budget per ticket might end up leaving and spending $250 or $300 a ticket. So it's, so number one, they would end up happier because I had really taken the time to understand what they're trying to achieve and what their pain points were and what was going on with them. But then number two is it was infinitely more profitable for me, right? And it was like there was nothing bad about it at all. It wasn't a high pressure sales tactic. It was like somebody calling up and saying, I've got this prospect that I'm really trying to impress. I want to take him to a Yankees game on Tuesday night against, and I want to try to spend $100 a ticket. And you'd be like, well, let me ask you a couple questions about this. What's going on? How important is this prospect? What's the size of the deal you're looking at? What's the situation around the prospect? And understanding, and you'll be like, well, it's not $100, but this is, maybe you can spend $200 and you sit right behind the Yankees dugout, and you're really going to impress this client because they're going to be like, this is fantastic. Whereas $100 might not get you very, very far down that road. And because you're consultative and empathetic to what the problem is, it allows you to make a lot better sales because they're not just bigger sales. They're also more, they're better in quality, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I mean, and I know this is going to sound crazy too, but they may come to you and say something, and that you can provide a value better than that for less money than that. And all of a sudden you're creating an incredibly loyal future client and someone who is absolutely going to be able to talk to you to other people. And so I think it's it's not just it's having an opinion once you learn that information. And I think reps often get too much into information dumping than opinion having. And if you're listening and asking questions and really caring about the result, they're going to really value your opinion, as long as it seems like it comes as a result of caring about them and having an opinion about what is the best thing for them.
That's the way you stated it is absolutely correct, because I will tell people that the reason I had a relationship with American Express from 2004 until 2010 for 6 years, which is a long time for, you know, a company like this, because it's not like people aren't demanding and like always trying to come up with a way to steal your business. Was because of that trust factor that I developed, where I would, if I told them that, like, hey, if this is what the customer's trying to achieve, they don't have to just spend this because it's the most revenue. Here's a better option, and it might be cheaper. And it was that trust of doing something like that that kept me, you know, that allowed me to continue to have that relationship. And it was where, because of that relationship, was where I succeeded and other people failed. Because it wasn't like I was the first person that like miraculously came along and was like the genius behind creating the black card ticket program. Other people had been taking a swing at it for 10 years, and they had failed because they were greedy or ignorant or not concerned about what the customer was going to gain from this, you know, what value they were creating. And all of those things will cause you to fail. You have to be a human and be present to be a successful salesperson.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And the other thing I want to touch on that you mentioned was, you know, the activity-based stuff that you talked about. And I think one of the things that, you know, I've learned as my career goes on is one of the most important things that we can teach a sales rep isn't how to have a new conversation. It's how to advance the conversations that they're currently in. Because, you know, one of the reasons that we say that you've got to make 100 new calls or 80 new calls is because we don't see a rep with a really developed pipeline. And so learning how to advance that pipeline and taking conversations forward is really important. So can you talk about the frustrations with the check-in call and how important it is for a young rep to understand to not throw away any dialogue they have with anyone at any time, and make sure everything they're doing is either advancing the conversation or kind of taking it off and giving people that opportunity to say no?
Yeah. Okay. So when you added the second part of the question in, that was like that was great, because you were talking about advancing the sale at every point. Because the first thing I want to address is the check-in call, which is awful, right? In most cases, it's the worst. And it's not because it's bad for like you to check in on somebody. It's because unless you can add value at every touch point, then you shouldn't just reach out just to reach out. And I don't want to make any kids or any people young in their career feel bad about this, because I'm going to tell you how I know this. It's because I made all these mistakes myself. I was,
100%.
I did it, right? And so the thing is like, always keep in mind is like, how can I add value, right? So a great reason to check in, right? And I'm using air quotes about check-in call, is maybe you have you have an understanding of who your customers are, right? You understand what their business challenges are, what they're trying to achieve. Maybe you find an article that would be interesting to them. Hey, I don't know if you saw this article. I read it. I thought about you for these two reasons. I wanted to share it with you.
Yep.
Boom, you've checked in now, right? But you've added value. Or maybe you know somebody, you know, you have a prospect or a client that you're working with that would benefit by knowing your other client. Introduce them. You again checked in, right? Maybe there is some kind of special event that you're going to host in the building, and you want to invite people, and you maybe say, hey, look, why don't you bring 2 or 3 of your best prospects to this thing? It's going to be great. Here's what we're doing. There, you've checked in, but at every point you've added value. And I think the challenge is that when you're early on in your career, you don't understand. You think you just have to check in, and like just checking in is like, sup, like you would like with your friends by texting them. But in a business context, you really have to be focused on adding value at every touch point for 2 reasons. Number one, people are overwhelmed with business communications and emails, which definitely probably multiplies on their personal side. But then number 2 is by adding value at every touch point, you become indispensable. And by becoming indispensable, you grow a relationship that is going to continue to grow, and you're nurturing this relationship. And hopefully it will allow you to continue to develop and generate more business from the relationship, as well as like you're going to have a personal relationship that hopefully is valuable to you outside of just the business context.
Yeah, we probably just made, or at least you probably just made reps, if they're listening, millions and millions and millions of dollars across their career by simply changing. I was checking into, I was thinking about you. That's probably the easiest way to transform a mindset there. I mean, it's absolutely brilliant. And so On that note, you've been pretty outspoken, and I've loved it, about things you've seen from teams and reps that bother you when it comes to ticket sales. So when
Yes.
thinking of sales reps individually, so divorcing them from the teams themselves, what are some of the things that you see, sales reps, young sales reps, old sales reps, all those sales reps, what are some of the things they're doing wrong that our audience can avoid?
Okay. Well, first let me address the how pointed I am, right? Because I know that I do that. It's a specific tactic. If I am just one of many, me too, right along with everybody else, nobody's paying me any attention. So nobody should ever take me being pointed personally. So I want to make a point of that. But some of the practices that happen that I think that are harmful to people's careers as salespeople, they is thinking. I'm going to give you three. Number one is thinking of things as a transaction, right? That probably works once. You can probably make a transactional sale. The problem is that if you make a transactional sale, it either will not be as lucrative as it could be, or
Nope.
it may require you or make you do things that will short circuit your ability to develop a long-term relationship. So one thing is try to be less transactional. Spend much more time if you can working on a relationship, even if it does become a one-time sale. Maybe you still want to figure out a way to cultivate a relationship so that it's not just like, I'm calling Brett so I can buy a ticket, right? Because that's going to be it's going to suck on your time. It probably positions you from a brand standpoint as something you don't want to be, which is the transactional ticket sales guy. Or it makes you do actions that are going to be destructive to you in the long term. The second thing that I want salespeople to do is I want them to learn to use the language better. I know for a while I was covering emails a lot, and I covered them because I saw people, destructively using language, right? Either using language that was flaccid or you know, not action oriented, mealy mouthed, um, lukewarm, whatever. Um, Use language in a way that is going to create a impact that's going to allow you to control it. You know, always try to upgrade your language so that you're using it more effectively. Um, this is something I talk about heavily in a new sales training program that I've been putting together called the language of the sale. And it really is it is because language is so valuable. It is the greatest tool that you have to control and direct a sales conversation. Your ability to control and grow relationships in the sales process is almost directly correlated with your ability to use language effectively. So number one is don't think transactionally. Number two is use your language more effectively. And then the third thing is to constantly keep growing and learning. I know that there is a plethora of sales training that goes on especially in the professional ranks. I know that there are tons and tons of opportunities out there to learn, right? There's this podcast, there's my podcast, The Business of Fun, there's Troy Kirby's podcast, The Tao of Sports. There are blogs, right? Brett, you keep a blog. I keep a blog. Kathy Burrows keeps a blog. God, everybody I know probably has a blog at this point. There are books, right? Here's three: the Lost Order Closing by Anthony Iannarino. Um, Permission Marketing by Seth Godin, and another great book I read recently was Million Dollar Maverick by Alan Weiss. Kind of constantly think about how I can learn more so that we can go back to the point we were talking about earlier, so that every time I touch and want to reach out to a client or a prospect, I have more value to create. If you just allow your professional development to be directed by what your team is providing you, you're limiting your ability to grow. It's not because the team isn't providing you great stuff. It's because they can't provide you everything. And it's incumbent upon you to take control of your own career by constantly learning and constantly seeking out new sources, new ideas, and new viewpoints to challenge those that you already have. Because as much as people think that I know a lot, I constantly am surprised by how little I know and how much I still need to
Yeah.
learn. And I would, I would challenge everybody to do that, because I think one of the big challenges that salespeople make is not being constant learners. Either because of time constraints, or they just, they feel like the training that they get internally is enough, or for whatever reason. But the thing is like, God, it's like a really cheesy quote, but I think it may be true, is that leaders are learners or leaders. And it's true.
Well, I think, especially on that last point, one of the things I remind people in my sales training, I think sometimes, that people are taken aback when I talked about it, but, I say that, like, you studied all through high school and you studied all through college on subjects and things that are making absolutely no impact on what you are doing currently. And the reality is, this is your job. It's your responsibility to know about your team's products. It's your job to know about the players on the team. It's your job to know about your sport. It's your job to know about sales, to the point you were making earlier. It's your job to learn about businesses so you can have better conversations with businesses about what they're doing every day. That information cycle, just because it's just such a larger gap than what you were learning in school, doesn't mean that you don't need to be attacking that gap, right? Oh, hold on.
This conference will now be recorded.
All right, so we should be back. Little technical difficulty, but the next thing that I want to talk about after we talked about learning, and I did my little rant there, was on language. And I think one of the things that I talk about when I talk about my sales training, I have a whole segment on selling yourself. And I think one of the important things to understand is that not just what you say, but how you say it matters. Like, it's both of those things. And I think sometimes we get in this whole mode of conveying information, that we forget to remind our fans that this is a very emotional buy that they're getting. I think, you were talking about, before, people becoming too transactional in it. And that's exactly right. I think that ties into the language side. Can you talk about how reps can start bringing some of that emotion of what they're actually selling into the sales process, even though by nature the sales process itself is transactional?
Right. Okay. So what I want to probably remind people of, to start with, is the fact that every sale is an emotional sale. We
Yep.
maybe hear some bad sales trainers or sales, and I'm going to use this air quotes again, thought leaders that talk about, oh, people are going to make a decision based on the facts you present them or whatever. And it's all garbage, right? Because every sale is an emotional sale. And what that means is that apathy is an emotion, indifference is an emotion, the same way as excitement is. So the thing that you have to realize is that you only have the ability to influence people to make a buying decision by your ability to excite them about what they're going to gain by buying, and coming to your game, right? Or to an event you're putting on, or whatever it is you're selling, right? Sometimes we feel like some of this stuff should be inherent, but if we don't uncover it and use our language skills and our passion to convey some of the reasons that it's still important, it could be lost. Let's go back to some of the things we were talking about earlier, where we were talking about how easily it is to get turned off by attending a game or an event because of poor customer service, or a bad experience in the food, at one of the food and beverage places, whatever it might be. That could be the experience of one of your customers, one of your fans. And you're going to need a set of language skills and a bit of persuasion and emotional transference to overcome that, that bad experience. But by the same token, maybe you can use the knowledge and understanding of that bad experience to turn it around, right? Because, hey, if you know that, like Dave Wakeman, because we all know that Dave Wakeman hates $16 beers and feels put off by standing in line,
Yep.
maybe what you do is, like, where my ticket is and you bring me a beer, right? So
Yep.
because I've been irritated by this thing. Or if you know that my son had a bad experience because maybe there was a foul. Like the Capitals is a good point. I forget the player, but he was throwing pucks over to trying to get one to a little girl before a game earlier last season, or towards the end of last season, and he kept throwing pucks over until she got one. Right, that's going to create an emotional connection, and knowing that somebody had a negative one, you can use stuff just like that, to create a positive emotional connection. And so, number one is that emotion is all you have in the sales process, right? So you better be excited about what you're selling, and you better be willing to listen and understand what your customer and your prospect is saying, because if not, what you're going to create is another emotion, one that's not going to be favorable to you. So I don't think I answered your question. I think
No,
I
you
talked
did.
around it.
No, that was perfect. And one of the things I want to address in there that I think is so critical is you hear a lot of sales trainers, or you go to a lot of teams, and I'll talk to a lot of reps who say, well, I get taught not to talk about any of the negative things. They don't want us to talk about, or ask if they've had a bad experience. They want us to put our clients into a positive frame of mind, a positive mindset, and work all the way through. Can you talk about, because I'm a huge believer in it, and I love that you talked about it. Can you talk about why addressing those negative experiences are critical to the sales process?
Well, thank you for this, because this is like one of the. I mean, this is probably one of those things that is a theme for me, right? Yeah. You gotta live in the world that exists, not the world you want that exists, but you must live in the world as it is, right? I think we see a lot of businesses, a lot of salespeople, a lot of marketing, a lot of political stuff, whatever industry area you touch, where this might be defined as fake news, or it might be talked about as framing, or whatever it is. All it means is that we're trying to create an environment where it's a bubble for us, where our little reality exists. The reality of the sales process is that what I care about doesn't matter. Not one bit. Nobody cares about me. What you have to, and we all have to understand and make certain of, is that you understand that what is important to the customer is important to me, right? If I know that a customer has had a bad experience, or if I know that a customer is upset or frustrated about something, for me to try to refute that by going, oh, Brett, it's not so bad that like the lines to get in the stadium were 45 minutes long. Just think of it as part of the atmosphere. You don't sound like positive. You sound like a moron, because you're trying to tell somebody that their real emotion that they feel, that their real challenge that they have is stupid. That's what you're telling you. You might not be saying they're stupid, but that's what they feel. That's, again, it's consumer psychology 101. So to just always put rose-colored glasses on things is a missed opportunity. It's not just a bad idea, it's a missed opportunity, because if you acknowledge the problem that somebody's dealing with, or you acknowledge the frustration, and then you take real action to resolve it or address it, then you've gained an emotional foothold that other people don't have. Because the thing is like most of the time with customer service challenges, the first thing is people just want to be heard and they want to be understood. And so by like turning it around and saying, oh, everything's great, it's all puppies and rainbows, right? You're giving away one of your greatest tools.
Yep. And I think it gets to the worst. So so I want to bring this one up because I think this is the worst one in sports, right? Is, well, the team's not winning, right? Because that becomes an excuse for the whole organization at that point, when that is a real opportunity to actually create an even more real connection with your fans, right? Because if you can convert these people into season ticket holders or partial plan holders now, the opportunity for what they're going to do for your organization when the team starts winning is incredible. So finding ways to have that empathy and not just saying, well, yeah, the team sucks, so I guess it's okay that I don't sell, or I guess it's okay that person on the other end of this phone said that. All you're doing is just creating a fan base that cares more about what happens on the field than what happens as it pertains to them being in the ballpark.
I would actually even stop you from saying caring about what's on the field, because, I live in DC, and the Nats have been fantastic for the last probably 5 to 7 years. Yet every year their reported attendance is in the middle of the pack, right? Even after averaging 90 to 95 wins over the last 6-7 years, right? Yep. So you've done something even worse. Instead of training them to only care about what's on the field, you've trained them to be apathetic to you no matter what, right? Yep. And I use the Nationals because they're an example of just winning alone doesn't solve the problems, right? Because they can't win. I mean, they could win. They could make it to the World Series. They could win a World Series. They can't do much more than that, right? They have the two or three of the most exciting players in baseball, right? On the team. And I'm probably doing a disservice to some of the other players just because, I don't want just because I don't know everybody on the team at this point. But so if you're not winning fans over and converting people into buyers at that point, there's a real broken aspect to your business model. So falling back on, well, the team's not winning as an excuse to not do the right thing is not just going to have short-term consequences that will move away once winning starts. They have long-term impact that turns into indifference and apathy, which has can have a decades or lifetime amount of harm on your brand. Some people never overcome this.
Yeah,
I mean,
and if you go down to
look at the Marlins, if we use another baseball example, right? They burnt the Miami market. And now I don't know that they'll ever come back, as sad as it is, because that's where I grew up.
Yeah. And I think, that goes down to the sales reps too, because one of the things I always train is if your team is not winning, that's a real opportunity to create an even deeper connection with the fan that you're talking to, right? Because one of my favorite lines is, listen, I have to talk to you guys on the phone all the time. Nobody wants this team to win more than I do, right? Like, there's that real opportunity to create empathy and then bring it back around. The thing that you can never, that a fan or a person can never take away from someone is being in the stands, right? And you and I talked about this before we got on air, but I took my 4-year-old stepson to a Hartford Yard Goats game last night, and we couldn't have had a better time. And I probably saw maybe out of the 7 innings we were there, 7.5 innings we were there, I probably saw 2 innings of baseball. And I'm a huge baseball fan, so I got to geek out during those 2 innings. But it was about nothing to do with who was winning or losing or what was happening on the field, but it had everything to do with the experience that we had while we were there and the opportunities that we got to have a further connection between us based on the result of being there.
Yeah, and that's absolutely right, because if you are selling only on winning, right, then you're saying that that's the only thing that matters. And I think that's maybe one of the problems is, like, you train people to believe that that's the only thing that matters. And that's the only, if it's a hot game, that's the only reason I should come out to the ballpark or to the stadium or to the arena, whatever it is. And that's bad, because as we see, again, I'm going to fall back on data here because I know everybody loves data. Marketing data shows pretty clearly that consumers are spending less money on stuff, and they are spending more money on experiences outside of maybe rock concerts. And where else can you go where you are going to see a once in a lifetime event every night? But baseball, football, basketball, soccer, hockey. And if you're not selling that, what are you really selling? Because you're giving up your advantage, for needlessly giving up an advantage that you have, especially one that in the marketplace, the market is telling you, not by like words, because a lot of times if you're doing research and you're asking people questions, if you ask them the wrong way, they're biased, right? By just looking at consumer data, all you have of what people are spending money on, you can just see it pretty clearly, with no bias at all, that people are spending less money on stuff and more money on experiences. So you should be excelling that experience, enhancing that experience to make it even more valuable at every turn. Not just as like looking at the customer as like, well, how much can I maximize each touch point with the person to make sure that I get the most out of them the one time they come to the ballpark. How about you play the finite game, or the infinite game of how can I get them to come back 5 or 6 times a year, and instead of getting them to spend $50 at one game, how can I get them to spend $25 at 6 games? Because it's number one, I'm getting, instead of $50, I'm getting 150. And then I'm also going to get them at not once, but 6 times a year, which is going to have a compounding effect. And it's going to be better for all the other customers that come and experience the game or the event the same way. Because nothing, like to quote Soul Asylum for those people that love the 90s rock, nothing attracts a crowd like a crowd.
Yeah. No, and that's such a great point. I want to make sure that each rep understands that, they can listen to what we just talked about and they can think about, well, that's an organizational thing. But that's an individual rep thing. Reps can take on that responsibility to make sure that their sales process mirrors what we just talked about. Now, the next thing, and I know we both, we danced around this a little bit. We both addressed this a little bit, but I do want to make sure that we take on product knowledge as a salesperson, because I know this is something that,
Sure.
that you and I both have a very strong belief in. Yet it just never seems to be a priority when organizations train reps. And so let's just go very, very basic on this. Why do organizations and individual sales reps need to spend more time on product knowledge? Product knowledge ranging everything from your team and your sport to understanding the world of business that we're in better.
Okay. I think those are 2 separate questions, and so I'll address them as such. The first one is like, why do you need to know what's going on in your building? I don't ever want to be in a position where a customer calls me up and they know more about what I'm selling than I do. That's a bad idea, right? They can maybe know as much if they've been a long-term fan and I'm new in my career, but I don't want them to necessarily, so overwhelm me with their knowledge that I look like a moron. I mean, it's simply like a self-defense mechanism, right? Because if you go into a sales situation where you are subservient, you are an order taker. It might not be, It may or may not be possible for you to become a peer, but you can definitely educate yourself to the position where that you're not just an order taker and somebody that somebody's barking at. I know. Absolutely. I'm going to use an example from, I believe it was the 2015 ALSD conference, when I forget the lady's name, but she was, I think, from Goldman Sachs. And the example really doesn't matter, but I think that's where it was. When she was talking about to teams that the number one challenge they have when buying from teams and is the lack of customer knowledge, which going to jump in, or the consumer or sales rep knowledge, which leads into the second part, which is like your business acumen. And the challenge is because they felt like they had to educate and train the sales rep on how to do business with Goldman Sachs, not that the sales agent was coming to the meeting or the conversation with a set of ideas and being able to manage the relationship on their own. And to them, that was extremely frustrating and extremely bothersome. And it probably reduced a lot of the spending that they would do on entertainment and tickets. So if that alone isn't, an example enough that a huge financial services company is telling you that, besides that, business acumen and the knowledge of knowing what's going on in the business will only make you smarter as a salesperson and as a business person. Because I think one of the myths that gets sold too hard is that just having sports business knowledge is enough, right?
Nope.
And the validity and the utility of some of the sports management programs, to me, is open for debate, right? Some of them are great, some of them not so much. I don't know if all of them keep up to deliver on what's promised, right? You need to be, in today's world, a smart business person, and that requires business acumen, because the thing is that the environment that you live in changes so rapidly. The inputs that are coming at you, at your clients, at your prospects, the environment that your business operates in is changing so rapidly that to just pretend that you can live in a sports business bubble and that's going to help make you valuable, to the people you're serving, but to your organization, is pretty ludicrous. Because the thing is like I think if we go back to what I was talking about, be constantly learning, you're going to understand that like just understanding sports business is very limited, right? When I listed the thing, when you asked me at the start about how did I become me, right? Like how did I come from? I didn't even list all the sports business experience that I had because in truth, some of it was like not that extremely valuable for some of the other stuff that I did, but I did work with the Dolphins. I did work with the Seahawks and I did work with the Sonics, right? But the most valuable stuff was a lot of other stuff that I learned that made me well-rounded, which made me valuable when I went back to tickets, right?
Yep.
And so the thing is like, if you don't have a lot of ideas and inputs coming in from all over the place, you are going to become less and less valuable because there's always going to be somebody else who's learning more. It should never be, you can never know enough. And again, I don't know if I really answered the question very effectively.
No, that's perfect. And I think, I think there's a humbleness, right? I mean, you can be powerful in the validity of your opinions and what you believe, but a lot of times the people that do it best, like yourself, are the people that have the humbleness to also know that they don't know what they don't know. But I also want to make a point too, is that it's not just good enough to learn about businesses and how businesses function, right? And this is something I learned when I was at CEB, which I felt very lucky about, was I didn't need to understand marketing better than the CMO that I was talking to, right? If I tried to do that, then, I was 25, he was 65 with 40 years of experience. That was going to be a big hill to climb. But what I needed to understand was how the resources at CEB solved the challenges that he would have. I didn't need to solve those challenges for him. What I needed to understand was how the resources at CEB could support him with the challenges that he was having. And I think that's what a rep needs to understand, that they need to know, right? It's not that they need to understand when a business person says this, how are we going to solve that for that person, which is why reps avoid the question. I think what we need to be able to say is, well, here's what you're going to get out of working with us as it pertains to the problem or challenge that you're having, right?
I would agree with that, yes, because I mean, again, that's a great point, right? It's like, I would, I'll use an example here, right? The guy I worked with on the Yellowtail project was a guy called Marty Maglione, who at the time was probably, and this is comparable to you, he was probably about 60, 65, I think, really like a genius marketer, right? And he knew more than about advertising at that point than I'm sure that I will ever learn in my whole life, right? But what he didn't know and what I did know was how we could take the challenge of introducing a product to an entirely new market that was sports based, and we could create something that would be unique to the market that had not been done before, which combined my knowledge and his knowledge in a way that created something entirely new. And I think if you think about the sales process like this, going like, I can be empathetic to what the person's dealing with, right? But I likely don't have the same knowledge, and I more than likely than not will never have the same knowledge that they do. But I do have a specific set of knowledge that is valuable to them in this context, and work on explaining it in the context of how you can work together to create even greater value. And then you have a chance, and that's exactly right on top of your CEB example, because at the time that I was working with Marty, I was probably 29. So, and and he's still like one of the better marketers I've ever met.
Yeah, and I think, that goes all the way back to your Goldman Sachs person, right? It's that Goldman Sachs person who's buying these tickets. They don't pretend like the sales reps are going to know more about Goldman Sachs than they know, and the challenges they have and how to solve them. But what she's hoping is that the people that she's talking to and she's having the conversation with will not just be able to say, well, here are the ticket packages we have, and here are the premium seats we have. Here's what they come with. Here's what they're available. Because she can read that on the website, right? What she's looking for.
That's exactly right.
What she's looking for is, how can you think about some of the stuff that we are talking about and kind of retrofit it into the opportunities that you have at your stadium, right?
That's right. And if you hit rewind button back to where I talked about when I sold $10 million in tickets to American Express in 1 year, right? Um, that was the core of it, right? I am not a lawyer, right? I am I did fairly well in college, so I'm a marketer, right? Like that's what my education is. I'm a marketer. So when a partner at a large white shoe law firm would call me up and explain to me that he's trying to win business, or she was trying to win business, and she needed to buy tickets for an event or a concert or whatever it was, I had no idea what in the world that's like, right? Because I did, because I obviously I closed the deal with American Express, but I didn't know what it means to like her or him to close a big law deal, right? What I did know though, what I could empathize with and what I could add value around was like, oh, if this client is worth $5 or $6 million to you, then like $100 seats that are like in the right field bleachers is probably not going to get you very far, right? It's not going to give the impression that you want. But I do know that I can get you these seats and say, like in the section 222 row, in the box that's right behind about 10 rows off the field behind the Yankees dugout, for a little bit more, but you're going to get tremendous impact. And this is stuff you won't find anywhere else because I'm the only person that has access to it. That's valuable, right?
Yeah.
And that's the kind of value that you can really create. I'm not going to ever know the law as well as any lawyer, right? But I do know that if a lawyer comes to me with a specific problem like that I can feel that need. I can empathize with them. I can create value for them because I know how to listen and understand their challenge. And through, my business acumen, I can understand what they're trying to achieve and then help them see solutions.
Yep. No, that's perfect. And I think, as you were talking there, I was picturing back, and one of the things I'm kicking myself right now about, the time in Houston versus, the success we had in Columbus. And, one of the things that we had is we had season tickets to the Blue Jackets, right? And they weren't done for our reps just to go there. We wanted our reps to use those for business purposes. And that's such a good idea for a young rep, right? To be able to take, if you're in, let's just use the Houston market, if you're able to take you work for the Dynamo, taking a potential client to an Astros game and getting that sensation of it is only going to help increase your knowledge about how to turn around and sell it.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, again, and it goes back to product knowledge, right? It goes back to relationships, and it goes back to the idea of product knowledge, relationships, and then more importantly, just being aware of what's going on in the world around you, right? Because if you take somebody to a Blue Jackets game and you're from the crew, you're also hopefully going to learn something about the presentation of a game. You're going to probably learn something about the ingress and egress into and out of the building. You're going to understand, maybe what kind of giveaways they do, what kind of food and beverage stuff goes on. Taking a prospect or a customer, you're also going to learn a lot about like what a typical customer looks like, hopefully, because you're going to see how that customer reacts when they're at somebody else's game, right?
Absolutely.
When you're there just as like, colleagues, not as like necessarily like client and, and sales agent, right? All these things are going to be very, very valuable. I mean, and it shouldn't, like, especially if you live in a market or you're with a team, it should also be very important for you to understand what everybody else is doing, because hopefully if you're doing your job the right way and you're building relationships and your focus is much on solutions, it's not going to be abnormal for you to refer people to the other teams in town, because you can be like, well, I don't know if what I'm going to offer you is going to get the most value, but I do know, because I've spent time with these people in this place, this is something that will be valuable. And you might miss out on one sale, but the likelihood of you getting 3 or 4 or 5 more because of your willingness to do what's best for your client goes up tremendously.
Yeah, rising tide lifts all boats is one of the things that I'm a huge believer in. So to close us down, I love asking this question at the end of every podcast, and it'll be very interesting to hear your perspective and your take on this. But what is it that drives you? You're someone that's worked inside and outside of sports, and now running your own company, and obviously someone with a an incredible opinion on the things that are happening. What is it that gets you up and out of bed and as active as you are?
Well, I think I'll give you three since I've been sticking to three things. Number one, I really just like to learn and I like to be smart. When I was a kid growing up in Georgia, in northern Georgia, my aunt and my grandmother, they told me pretty religiously that if you were smart and you worked hard, then nobody could take these things away from you. And so like always being smart has always been something that's really, really been important to me. So that's why I spend so much time like learning and reading and writing, because this is how I learn, I read to learn, but I also write to learn, right? Because until I've like kind of like worked out my thoughts, on paper or in a blog post, I'm not exactly sure how I have completely come around to an idea, so that's really important to me, is to be smart. Number two is I'm very competitive, right? I like to win, so that drives me too. So it's like I always want to figure out a way to win, which is like marketing, right? In sales, it's a zero-sum game, right? Like if I don't make it, in a lot of ways, if I don't necessarily make the sale, for like a consulting project, somebody else, either it, or how do I want to put it? If I don't make the sale, I don't get anything. I lose completely. So I'm very competitive against myself in wanting to compete that way, because to me, I view it as a infinite game, because I'm trying to always develop relationships and develop more business. But I'm also competitive in knowing that if I don't make the sale, I don't accrue anything from all the work I've done, in that moment. So that keeps me going as well, being competitive. And then finally, I think it's also, I really have, as I become more outspoken and more public in my opinions and a lot of the stuff I do, I really dig the relationships, right? This is like one of the really, really nice things that I've learned about doing a podcast, right? Which is the business of fun. I'm sure Brett will put it in the show notes, but if not, you can Google it, it'll come right up. Is that the relationship aspect of it, because it helps me it helps me learn. But I really just enjoy being around and being able to exchange ideas and work with people, and the more diverse and the more different and the more intelligent, the better. And that really has, been a big driver for me as well. And it probably, a lot of the response and the feedback and the connections I make and the relationships I develop, that probably even feeds it even more.
I have no doubts there, and look forward to continue talking with you in the future. And this was awesome. I definitely appreciate you coming on. I think whether you're a sales rep all the way up to a VP or even a president, that there's got to be something to take away from this podcast, and those are always the best ones. So certainly appreciate it, Dave.
Yeah, no, I really, really appreciate this, and I would tell people that if they want to find out more about me, visit my website. That's davewakeman.com. There's a blog there that is updated basically every day. Connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter or all those things, because I'm always happy to connect. And thanks for listening to this stuff, man. I mean, it's, I think you can learn a lot. I think podcasting is like one of the great new mediums that people are using, really, really well. And I hope yours is it's greatly successful.
I appreciate it, and off to a good start. So we'll be talking more sooner. And again, appreciate the time.
Of course, man. Thank you for having me.